Check. Check. 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. Welcome, everybody. Pat Leonard here from the New York Daily News and the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard podcast. Thanks for joining me here on a lunchtime live Q&A here from the New York, New Jersey area. Figured this was as good a week as any to fit in a live Q&A with our loyal community here on the YouTube page at PL on NFL. Wanted to give you guys an idea, an opportunity to ask me about the story that I wrote, the exclusive in the New York Daily News about Brian Daboll, Wink Martindale, Mike Kafka, and the Giants' internal dysfunction and drama. Also wanted to tell you guys about some things I'm hearing around the league and answer your questions. It could be about the coaching carousel, which is spinning as we speak. It could be about the NFL's playoffs, how I see that shaking out. I recently filed my voting for the Professional Football Writers Association's own awards given out to players, coaches, and executives at the end of the year. So wanted to share those as well. Hunter, thanks for jumping right back in here. Really appreciate you always being here, being first in line. Joking that the Giants hacked into my setup and turned off all my volume. Yeah, no, our first round was rocky there, but I'm ready to go. And happy to be back here with you guys. As I have promised, I'm going to get a regular schedule to you for the offseason for when we are going to do these live chats. Good afternoon, Austin. Thanks for joining me. And promise that we'll get something regular going when, as we ramp up here. We have the Giants filling vacancies on their staff. We have the Giants planning for an eventful Senior Bowl. We have the Combine coming up. We have draft prep. We have a lot of question marks about this organization, a lot of question marks about the division, about around the league. The Dallas Cowboys keeping Mike McCarthy. I mean, it's all been spinning. And as you guys know, a lot even happens just in 24 hours. Antonio, what's going on? Immortal TK, how are you? Yeah, Immortal TK says he hopes the Giants fill out their staff soon. We will see about that. Interviews and that process underway. Going to tell you real quick about our sponsors, and then we will get into your questions. Please drop your questions in the queue, and we will get to them ASAP. All right, so with the NFL playoffs here and the NBA season in full swing, guys, BetOnline has you covered with all the up-to-the-second odds, news, and scores. With additional odds, lines, trends, and info on both desktop and mobile, you can access the world's best wagering information anytime. Head there today to get in on the action, see all the updated odds. Remember to use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. And also, we are brought to you by Estate 98 Coffee. Got my tumbler right here. Estate 98. It is an Esencia de Cafe from El Salvador. Dates back to 1798. Makes a quick iced coffee, hot coffee, even good as a mixer in drinks at night. So recommend that to you as well. And just to get us warmed up here, wanted to drop these in the conversation as well. I voted recently for my Professional Football Writer Awards for the 2023 NFL season. And, any feedback or debate or discussion as we go talking about the Giants as well, I wanted to drop them in here. My most valuable player vote was Lamar Jackson from the Baltimore Ravens. My offensive player of the year, Christian McCaffrey from the San Francisco 49ers. My defensive player of the year is Myles Garrett of the Cleveland Browns. My rookie of the year, C.J. Stroud, quarterback from the Houston Texans. Offensive rookie of the year goes to Puka Nacua from the LA Rams. Defensive rookie of the year I gave to Jalen Carter from the Philadelphia Eagles, even though obviously the Eagles defense became a huge disappointment. Still a standout rookie there. My comeback player of the year, I'm giving to Baker Mayfield, possibly colored obviously by the fact that he just won a playoff game as well. Of course, DeMar Hamlin, Joe Flacco are guys who get mentioned, and if they win the award, no problem with that. But Baker Mayfield, I think, really bounced back in a big way. 17-game starter, gets to the playoffs, wins a playoff game. Kudos to him. Most improved player of the year, Jordan Love, quarterback from the Green Bay Packers. I also liked Nico Collins here for the Houston Texans as a receiver, but giving it to Jordan Love. Coach of the year, John Harbaugh of the Baltimore Ravens. Executive of the year, Brad Holmes, GM, Detroit Lions. Several candidates for that as well. And finally, last but not least, assistant coach of the year, Bobby Slowick, offensive coordinator, Houston Texans. Everybody deserves a lot of credit in Houston, even considered D'Amico to be my coach of the year. All right, so let's get right into your questions. You've been very patient, and you guys are always so good at drumming up some good conversation here. So let's go. Dan Cam says, is Kafka good as gone at this point? So Dan is asking about Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator, and whether he is gone. No, he is not gone, Dan, and he is not as good as gone at the moment. I know that it rang hollow that Brian Daboll said that he expected Wink Martindale to be back. And so also when he says in the same breath he expects Mike Kafka to be back, and then as my story detailed, Mike Kafka actually caught the brunt of a lot of the worst on the sideline as far as reactions and criticism and taking play calling away from Brian Daboll. So I'll be honest with you, Dan, I think it would make sense for Mike Kafka to remove himself from that dynamic if he was able to, even if it was a lateral move to another team's offensive coordinator. But as of right now, my information doesn't point to him leaving the Giants right now, unless obviously he were to get a head coaching job. Like if he gets a head coaching job, he's interviewed, has interviews with, or has interviewed already with the Titans and the Seattle Seahawks. So in that case, of course, getting a head coaching job, then you'd be gone. I don't personally think he lands either of those jobs from my vantage point. I think it's good for him just that he got those interviews coming off the offensive situation and the mess that he's been dealing with and coaching here in New York for this season, especially. It's just hard for anybody associated with a side of the ball that fares like that to be able to capitalize on the opportunity. But Dan, I will say this. I mean, if Mike Kafka stays, based on how Brian Daboll handled last year, does the head coach now, feeling the pressure and, being under some fire now, does Brian Daboll just take play calling on his own? So does that make Mike Kafka into the final year of his contract still the OC, but not the play caller, right? Like that could certainly be a change there as well. But we'll see. But my answer to you is no, he is not as good as gone at this moment. Although I do think that it makes sense and would make sense based on everything that he would be. Hunter says, do you think that if the Giants were to start, say, 0-5 and 1-4, could Daboll be fired quickly next year? Yes, I do, Hunter. And that's not, no one said to me in the last few days that he would be fired if that happened. But given everything I've portrayed to you guys and described to you as in this story and in my reporting as the situation of how the Giants are operating and what their problems are, I do. Yes, my informed opinion would be that if next year started the way that this year did, he would no longer be the coach and wouldn't last the full season. That's just answering your question. Roman 616 says, with Daboll's behavior and drama aside, how big of an issue do you think Daboll sort of being on the hot seat is in terms of attracting a top coordinator candidate? Romans, I think it certainly becomes a part of the conversation, like with any candidate and their representatives and agents when they have options as well. I think that absolutely is a factor. Like I said, I had one staffer in the building, described to an outside assistant who was calling about a vacancy with the Giants, do not come here. And like, if one person is saying that or hearing that, that's the sentiment coming from parts of the Giants building and coaching staff and their staff in general. And so, yes, is Brian Daboll and are the Giants understanding now fully after seeing it publicly displayed really what they need to work on and correct for this program to continue on to return to a positive trajectory rather than continue on the downslope? Yes. But I think there's no question about it, Romans, that given the element of the high turnover that has happened already on this staff and a lot of the reasons behind why that high turnover has happened, I think that anybody coming to New York has to be wary of the fact that they might only be here for a year because of the situation and how shaky the ground is now underneath this foundation that was supposedly being built and that we thought was being built in year one. So yes, I do think that's a factor. I do think that's a factor. William says, could we not talk anymore about the Wink fiasco as that is old news already? William, we can talk about whatever you want. Would love for you to ask a question about anything. Doesn't have to be about Wink Martindale or Brian Daboll or Mike Kafka or Thomas McGahee. But I disagree with your comment that that is old news. That is not, I'll say this again. I said this on my podcast on the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard podcast feed. And if you listened to that episode, thank you. If you didn't, check it out after this. But the story I wrote and the reporting I did, it is not about personalities clashing and old news about the team that is no longer relevant, William. As Roman's question implicated and accurately stated, there are repercussions to this type of situation. And it's also indicative of the situation that continues to exist in the building because the same leadership is there, right? And so I think if you read the story, you get a full picture of the way that the Giants have been operating. And if you really understood it, like this is not about, you ask in the question, you ask about Wink. Wink Martindale is gone from the Giants. Mike Kafka, who in my story, about a little over maybe 40% of that story has to do with Mike Kafka and Brian Daboll. And Mike Kafka still works there, right? So to say that it's old news and not relevant is incorrect. And, it's not pleasant, but it's not irrelevant. But I would love to talk about something else, William, if you want to, for sure. Immortal TK says, I'm good. How are you? Who do you think will be the new DC? Dan says he thinks it's going to be Leslie Frazier. I would say that's definitely a name to keep an eye on. I do think the Giants are casting an extremely wide net on this one. Regardless of what you think of any of the parties here and whether you take the Giants side against Wink Martindale and Mike Kafka and Thomas McGahee and all the other assistants, or you take a side against Brian Daboll and the Giants or whatever, which again is not the purpose of this. It's not about creating sides. Anyone who's creating sides here is probably someone who doesn't have any information and is just shaking their fist at the clouds, like the old guy in The Simpsons. I think in the defensive coordinator search, the Giants have to, if I were the Giants, what I would be doing is trying to make sure that the new defensive coordinator was not running such a different system that the personnel I've been acquiring and adding and drafting and developing was not suddenly being used in different spots in a completely different scheme, and that those inconsistencies were hindering the defense's ability to adjust and hit the ground running in week one. So I don't know who that means yet. I can tell you, like the Giants, because they are aware and everyone in the NFL is aware that the most difficult side of the Giants team to play against has now been torn apart in a way with Martindale leaving. The Giants are very aware, and Brian Daboll is very aware, that they need to get this hire more than right? Because their offense, they hope and are going to try for their offense to be competent next season. But right now, the reason the Giants were in any of these games had to do with forcing takeaways and the defense, sometimes holding the dam until it broke, right? And so they're in no rush to select somebody. They need to pick somebody who is the right fit. And that's going to mean in interviewing a lot of people. Really, the best thing here would have been not losing a coach like Wink Martindale. But obviously, it was pushed to that point. All right. Antonio says, do you expect the Giants to interview more candidates for defensive coordinator, and who do you consider the favorite based off all the guys I've interviewed so far? Yeah, Antonio, that's what I was just kind of referring to. I find it hard to believe that their list is anywhere close to done right now. I think they are definitely trying to turn over every stone to figure out the best way to maintain consistency in scheme while also adding somebody who, um, will be consistent with the way that the Giants want to manage their games and run their games. Adam says, what do you make of Wink changing Tamon Fox's number to put him on the active roster without running it by Daboll and Schoen? Yeah, Adam, that I saw that note mentioned in the how do I put it? The Giants' response to my story. Would that be accurate? I don't know. I mean, it's not like the Giants' voices weren't represented in my piece, though. And we're certainly that was kind of a full scale picture of what it looks like in the building. Adam, I find it hard to believe, that an assistant who wasn't the head coach or GM would think that he could get a player on the game day roster without the coach or GM doing it, when the GM and the head coach are the ones, especially the GM, they're the ones who decide who's active on game day. I remember actually seeing that at practice. Not sure that the person who told that story was at practice that day, but I remember seeing that at practice, and my vantage point, like usually when that happens at practice, it has to do with maybe like giving the player that jersey number because that's the position that player is playing in the practice scheme or might be playing in the game scheme. But I'll just tell you this right now, like Mike Kafka or Wink Martindale or Thomas McGahee or Shea Tierney or Bobby Johnson or whoever, they're not getting a guy on a game day roster if Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll don't say that he's going to be on the game day roster. So that was a bit strange, that story. Doug says, any specific reasons for Lamar as MVP over the other top quarterbacks? Yeah, Doug, I mean, I think that was the best team in football along with the 49ers. But I think, they were running people off the field. And even though their defense was very good, I think Lamar Jackson elevates his team while being elite, also elevates his team more than everyone else in the league, and is not a product of a system as much as he is the system. And, his stats are elite. His passing and his rushing both were dynamic this season. He took a step this year as a passer. He was able to continue to help the Ravens dominate, even losing Mark Andrews, his top target. And, I think he's one of the most unique, elite, and special players in the league. And, like I said, defense is strong in Baltimore. But to me, Lamar's game-changing ability and the fact that nobody really has an answer to how to stop him right now. I mean, maybe in the playoffs it'll get him again. But, he's looking for that playoff win. He's looking for that Super Bowl. But he's about to win a two-time MVP, second-time MVP, and I think for good reason. Like guys like Brock Purdy and Dak Prescott and Tua had, good years, good stats. But to me, like the Brock Purdy thing, and I don't even think this is taking anything away from him, but, when I first heard people saying that he should be an MVP candidate, and they were saying, it could be McCaffrey or Purdy, and, I love Debo and what he did. And it's like, well, hold on a second. You're telling me all these guys on the Niners could be an MVP conversation. So to me, most valuable player is like that one player lifts his team and elevates his team. And like, to me, if Christian McCaffrey could be the Niners' most valuable player, how does that make Brock Purdy the most valuable player in the league? Like, I don't see that as being feasible. Whereas if you take Lamar off of the Ravens, they're nowhere close to the same team. Guys, remember, thanks for your participation. We're going to keep it rolling here. Remember, we have our super chats and super stickers that you can purchase in this chat. If you're getting impatient, if you want a question answer right away, if you have to go soon, you can pay money to have your comment highlighted and elevated in the chat. It's just a nice way to support the community we're building here and also get your comment, question, opinion answered right away. And also remember, if you don't already subscribe here at PL on NFL, that's my handle on Instagram, Facebook, I believe, YouTube, TikTok, and then at P Leonard NYDN on X. And of course, nydailynews.com/sports for the latest Giants and NFL coverage from yours truly. All right, let's get to Playboy Phil. What's up, Phil? How you doing? Phil says, I have the same feeling about Caleb Williams being a Giant, exactly like how I did for Saquon Barkley, and it's been before the season even ended. So you think they're going to go all the way up to 1 and that the Chicago Bears are going to trade out of that pick and that the Giants are going to get him? That sounds like what you're saying, Playboy Phil. I think when all's said and done, the Bears are going to stay there, take Caleb Williams, and trade Justin Fields. Because Fields has enough value that you can trade him to someone, but he hasn't proven that he's good enough as a passer to warrant sticking with him either. So I think it's going to be Caleb Williams to Chicago. I do think a quarterback is in play for the Giants, though. I keep saying that. Lane says, hey, Pat, the smartest thing Daboll Schoen could do is get a new QB and now offensive coordinator and DC, so it, quote, buys them another year. If they stick with Jones and they win 6 games, they are both gone. Lane, that's a really good point. Joey B, I see you jumping in down there. What's up, Joey B? Thanks for coming in. Lane, you bring up a really good point, and I'm glad you did. So let's think of the Giants situation right now. Now, I don't think getting a new OC and DC, buys you more time. I do think getting a new quarterback, if you hit on that quarterback and the Giants believe you hit, maybe buys you another year, depending on how this year goes. Here's the tricky part, though. What are we seeing right now reinforcement of in the NFL? We are seeing reinforcement of the Packers now twice have had a situation where while their current starter was playing capably, they drafted another quarterback, had him sit behind him, develop, and then eventually become the starter after, at least a year, usually more, of sitting back. Aaron Rodgers was 3 years. So you have Rodgers from Favre, you have Love from Rodgers, right? You also have Mahomes in Kansas City essentially sat for a full year behind Alex Smith, right? So all of those things point to, sorry, I was seeing a bunch of comments flooding in because the chat is starting to pick up here. If any ads drop in as we're talking, guys, I'll be right here. You'll see me right back here once the ads go through. And reminder, super chat, super stickers if you need something answered right away. But so, Lane, if you're the Giants and you draft, let's say you draft a quarterback, Penix or Bo Nix or whoever it is, or you trade up for Drake May at, from 6 to 2 or whatever it is. I'm just throwing numbers out there. We could talk specifics about what those teams might do. But if the Giants go and get that quarterback, yes, it would be great if Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen could buy another year, play Daniel Jones because you have so much money committed to him in 2024, groom the young guy, and then play the young guy starting in 2025. Like, man, that would be awesome, right? Can you endure that, though? Can you be that patient? And would the organization, ownership, general manager, head coach, player, would everybody be able to be patient if 2024 went as badly or worse compared to this year, right? So I would, if I'm the Giants and I'm saying, if I'm John Mara and I'm saying, you know what, one thing I keep doing wrong is I keep trying to get the quick fix. And again, Joe Schoen said in his press conference that they accelerated the process a little bit for Daniel Jones's contract. Look at where we are now. A mistake, right? If ownership, though, sat there, looked themselves in the mirror and said, we can't keep rushing things. And of course, if they're really going to stand behind the regime, given how bad it's gotten here already, then would they bite their tongue and, swallow their pride and not their pride, but swallow another, losing terrible season and give Daboll and Schoen the ability to wait till 2025 to play the kid? Or would everybody want to see the kid if it was going poorly in 2024? And then there would be calls for him to play and he would eventually go in and maybe he's not ready yet. Or maybe he jumps in and he's the answer, right? In that scenario, if Daniel Jones and the Giants were winning in 2024 and the kid's waiting till 2025 and they're kind of treading water, maybe that works. Or if Jones struggles or gets hurt again and the kid comes in and looks great, those are the types of things that buys people time. But then there's also the flip side and the risk and the potential for it to go south, especially because you guys all know as well as I do how much this roster needs. Long-winded answer there, Lane, but you asked a really smart question, I think, about about a team that or about a topic that I think is extremely relevant to where the Giants sit right now. Yeah. And before we get to, so here, Hunter Keller is going to be next in the queue. Before we get to that, I just wanted to say this to my community here and to our community and the Giants fan community is I just want to stress, I do feel, and this is not to toot my own horn, but I just want to stress that nothing about the situation here. There's been a lot of toxic conversation and debate and finger pointing and accusations thrown around in public. Some of it by, the team, some of it by media members, a lot of people going after different people, making it personal, being nasty. That is not what I'm doing here. What I want to do here and what I was doing throughout the season is bringing to you guys what was happening behind the scenes, telling you what was coming. And I think anybody here recognizes, and I hope you recognize that the point of all this is to do reporting and analysis of the New York Giants and the NFL and to try to bring that to you, right? Sometimes it's going to be about the Giants. Sometimes it's going to be good. Sometimes it's going to be critical. Sometimes it's going to be like on my podcast the other day. I literally said that, in my opinion, the Eagles right now look like one of the worst teams in the league, let alone one of the worst teams in the playoffs. The Dallas Cowboys are complete choke artists, right? And what are they doing keeping Mike McCarthy? Like, these are all, like, if I were covering the Eagles every day, you can't even start and stop with the amount of things that there are to pick apart about what went wrong with that organization, or with the Cowboys and their lack of an ability to contend on the fronts of either side of the ball, offensive line and defensive line right now. They don't have a running game. They fall flat on their face. They weren't even prepared for a playoff game, right? So, but I just want you guys to know, and I want people to recognize, because I want more Giants fans to keep coming here and keep having these conversations, because I have a lot of information and opinions and insights to give. And that's what I want to continue to do here with you all, and what we are going to continue to do. And I just ask, don't listen to the toxic messages and the shots fired at me or at, people accusing of leaks and accusing, selling any version of the truth other than one that is well thought out, well reported out, and that is borne out to be true, right? Just can't stress that enough. Hope I'm being clear in my message there. But the bottom line is, what you're going to get here is what's happening. And I think a lot of the people lashing out and angry right now are the people who sat and watched a full season with the team without any idea of what was actually going on with that team. Okay. All right. So Hunter says, speaking of Wink Martindale, have you heard of him anything about, speaking of Wink, have you heard anything on him getting a job next year? Yeah, Hunter, I think defensive coordinator for a different team is the most likely scenario there. I know the Jacksonville Jaguars were first on the docket. I believe Albert Breer reported that interview was happening. So the Jacksonville Jaguars were first on the docket. It'll be interesting to see what other places, come next. Excuse me. There are different, one interesting thing about this divisional round of the playoffs, everybody, is I think certain teams and candidates also end up waiting on situations like, okay, where is this going, right? Like Raheem Morris, for example, in with the Rams. If he gets a head coaching job, and that very well could happen, then a defensive coordinator like Martindale on the market, suddenly you go from the Rams not being an option to maybe the Rams being an option. What do you think of Sean McVay, Wink Martindale, Les Snead as kind of like a big three, right? But that's not an option right now because Raheem Morris doesn't have a job, at least not yet, as a head coach. But he very well could. What if he gets the Washington Commanders job, right? Like those are things to consider. We all know the Eagles are a team that, geez, I mean, Nick Sirianni and Jeffrey Lurie honestly could be meeting right now. If they keep Sirianni, they're probably going to need 2 new coordinators. If they don't keep Sirianni, they're going to need a whole new staff. There's also other coaching staffs. There haven't even been head coaching hires yet, right? Tennessee Titans, Atlanta Falcons, LA Chargers, right? So, I'm just Seattle Seahawks. So I think all of those situations are evolving so far. I think the most likely end result for Martindale seems to be another defensive coordinator job at another position. And so far, the interview that we know about is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, Albert Breer first to report that. All right. Dan says, thank you for the honest answer. Follow-up would be, is there a negative mark on Daboll if Kafka is allowed to leave for a lateral move, offensive coordinator on another franchise? Yeah, Dan, I think, first of all, I think kind of the damage is done there because everybody knows the dynamic between him and Mike Kafka now. I do think perception and public relations wise, it would be even worse of a look league-wide for the Giants to have lost or fired all of their coordinators, which, as you can see from my story, like that's where that was headed, right? All 3. That's where it was clearly headed based on how the season was going. So there's even, a possibility that part of the Giants' motivation in keeping Mike Kafka is because of how bad that would look and how much confirmation that would give everything, right? So I think that would put a more negative mark, is the perception. Because honestly, unfortunately, the one thing about our world that just is a reality is sometimes and often perception ends up being reality. And so in that case, keeping Kafka from a PR standpoint maybe is favorable for the Giants. But like I said, possible that he could stay here but not be calling the plays based on how Daboll reacts to everything. Antonio says, anything you're hearing on the special teams coordinator job? Jordan Ronan reported the Giants were interested in Larry Izzo from Seattle. Yeah, again, casting a wide net, just like the defensive coordinator job. Don't know who's the front runner yet. I know they got blocked on a couple different requests early on. But, definitely I think the Giants' priority here is not to do anything fast or quickly, but to do it right, because they know how big these hires are, all of them. Carmen Brasillo was somebody that there's some familiarity with there as a New England guy who was there with the Raiders for the offensive line. Joel Thomas from the New Orleans Saints is a well-regarded running backs coach. They've had a lot of turnover there at that position. The Giants staff, as I mentioned, DeAndre Smith, their former running backs coach now in Indianapolis, somebody who caught some of the heat from Brian Daboll the previous year. But so they filled some positions, but Antonio, a lot of names being thrown around right now and a lot of people being discussed, and the Giants need to be delicate and diligent about making sure all the pieces fit. And if I'm ownership, I'm monitoring all that search very closely as well. Roman says, I feel almost 100% certain the Giants will find a way to draft a quarterback in the first round, mainly in order to extend the timeline of the GM and head coach. That's possible, Romans, but also remember in the great question that Lane asked earlier, if you need to tread water enough to buy yourself some time as well, yeah, drafting your quarterback's all well and good, but your team needs to be good enough and improved enough next year for the Giants franchise and their ownership to think that you're making any progress at all. So does a wide receiver or an offensive lineman mean more for Daniel Jones and the offense right now and with that first pick than the quarterback? That's possible. Um, I still believe in my heart, like you said, like I believe that Joe Shane's the kind of guy, like if there's one quarterback here that he's in love with, he's going to try to get him with that top pick. Um, so I agree with that, but I don't think you can count out offensive line or receiver. Hunter says, I do think there could be an intriguing opportunity for a coach to be the defensive coordinator. They could end up being the interim coach and do well and push their career along. Yeah, but you're not going to sell it like that to anybody. And if it gets bad enough that Daboll weren't here for the second half of next season, then it'll really be bad. And it probably would end up being the type of interim situation, Hunter, that Steve Spagnuolo was in after McAdoo got fired, which was like, don't really want to be here, but I kind of have to be for the next 4 weeks, right? That's how it ended up. Let's see. Is there anyone else besides coaches that wear headsets on game day? Doug says, I know Cade Knox is up in the booth with one. Yeah, Doug, it's Cade, and I believe other members of the game management team. There's Ty Siam, I believe, and Cade Knox in that game management group. And then it's coaches both on the sideline and up in the box. And then, as I said in the story, Joe Shane jumped on the headsets for those 4 games, the Washington, New England, Green Bay, and New Orleans. And as I pointed out, there are GMs in the league who do that. It's not normal or typical. Like Nick Caserio does it in Houston, and Will McClay in Dallas has done it. And now Joe Shane has done a little bit of it as well. But those are the people who are on the headsets. All right, Joey B says he's checking in from the barber shop. That's right, Joey B. Appreciate you. Stephen G says, are they retaining Kafka? As of this point, Stephen, I believe so. Let's see. And the players seem to believe in Daboll. Do you agree? Says Stephen. Stephen, in my story, I mentioned that point that the players did not mutiny because, Daboll spent a lot of time on the players and cultivating those relationships and shielding them, frankly, from a lot of the other things that were going on. So maybe goes after a coach, but, not after a player, let's say. Like if there's a situation that happens, goes after the coach, but not the player. So then the player doesn't take the brunt of it or resent Daboll, but then the coach situation starts to fray, right? But yes, I mean, one player told me to my face, was talking to him about a lot of things one day, told me that, that it's not good there right now. But the fact that they were able under Daboll, that Daboll was able to get them to the playoffs and win a playoff game the previous year still meant something to the group in there and gave them confidence that they could keep going. I mean, you guys have remember too, like they came into this season talking about the Super Bowl. The Giants did. Brian Daboll, according to Sterling Shepard, Brian Daboll was talking about it. Sterling Shepard said that publicly and then, got sent up to the principal's office. Dexter Lawrence said flat out he was done building. It's time to go win and win a Super Bowl. That's the goal, right? So, I think that they're aware that it's not good there right now. But I wrote this in the story. Like you try to be as fair as you can to everybody involved when you're telling people the truth about what's going on. And that part of it is true too. Like the fact that, the players did not mutiny on Brian Daboll. The players did not at the end say, I'm done with this guy. And that's probably part of the reason he's still the coach. And Joe Shane cited that too at the end when I asked him to review Brian Daboll's performance as a coach during the season. He said he thought the fact that the team didn't quit and the players kept playing and showing great effort, even when the season was long gone, reflected well on Daboll. And so that obviously is going into their thinking as well when they're evaluating him. Brett says, nice article, Pat. Thank you, Brett. Appreciate you, man. What do you think our options are in free agency for the offensive line? Well, Brett, first of all, you mentioned the offensive line. I think it's we got to shout out Justin Pugh, our the Giants left guard, who I know, middle of January here, he and his wife expecting their first child, a baby girl. So whenever that announcement comes, whenever that happens, good luck to the Pews, and really excited for him and for them. And it's been a pleasure seeing Justin again through this season, having him back on the team, back in the locker room, back in New York. Really have appreciated him. So I do want to say that. Brett, I think broad strokes, I would say you need some game battle tested players. Like I know Giants fans loved to say that John Feliciano, for example, was a guy that they were eager to replace coming off the first season, but they missed like a dog like Feliciano, like Nick Gates, and I know Joe Schoen was quick to dump on Nick Gates the first chance he got at his next press conference. And, Gates did get benched as the starting center earlier in the year in Washington. So that much is true, but the Giants missed him. The Giants missed these kind of battle-tested, veteran, versatile players who can play center, can play guard. And you don't have to pay a lot for all those guys. They're not necessarily going to be the elite, like Pro Bowl, all-pro guy on your team. But I think you look at their roster this year, Joe Schoen erred in a big way in believing and assuming that his three young guys from the year before, along with his veteran signing, Mark Lewinsky. So he signs Mark Lewinsky, drafts Evan Neal, Josh Azudu, and Marcus McKeithen, his first offseason arriving as general manager. And despite that, you come into this season essentially counting on all three of those young guys to just fill the gaps, whether it's as a starter or a backup or whatever it is. And you can't do that again. You have to go in free agency, like you said, and you have to go get some guys who have been through it, who aren't going to fold and put their heads down when things go poorly, and who aren't, you can't have everybody in the developmental stage here. Like, you got to have some answers at some of these key spots. I don't know yet who they're, specifically going to be targeting. The Raiders have, some veterans who are free agents. I think Carmen Brasillo coming over from Vegas. I'm looking right now. I see they had Greg Van Roten at right guard. He played 98% of the snaps at age 34, though. Yet Andre James, center, played 92% of the snaps. He was at $4 million. Obviously, they drafted John Michael Schmitz at center. The Giants did. So they want him to be the guy there. You have Andrew Thomas at left tackle. But I think you're looking at right tackle, left guard, right guard. Ben Bredesen and Justin Pugh give you plenty to think about, especially as far as being available for depth and, and other things. Or even Jermaine Elamanor, the right tackle from the Raiders. He is a free agent as well. So I do think you should probably start there. That's probably where I should have started my answer too, is with take a look at the guys that Brasillo has coached up. He's also coached up some guys from New England. And Daboll, of course, comes from the Bill Belichick tree. So that's something to watch for as well. Let's see. Lesnar says, how many resources do you think will be allocated toward the offensive line this offseason? Okay, yeah, we just talked about that. Lesnar, I think, so last offseason, John Mara wanted run defense to be a priority personnel-wise. It was, but it still wasn't good enough. So that does not reflect well on those moves, even though Okereke did very well. But this season, I think it's no question about it. The offensive line, again, ends up being a priority. Doug says, shots fired at the New York Post. Did anyone at the Giants, like Pat Hanlon, et cetera, reach out to you about your story after it was public? Does that ever happen? And what do you do as a reporter if they try to step in? Doug, I think there's a misconception here. First of all, I feel like all the shots have been fired in the direction of any reporting that is done that is not blessed by the team in a lot of fans' viewpoints, as far as not some of what was in my story was favorable to the team and to Brian Daboll, about how the locker room stands behind him. Some of it was critical, right? Some of it was just flat out objective truth, like Joe Schoen being on the headsets, right? Not one reason he was, but one of the reasons was to monitor that dynamic, right? Like, there don't need to be shots fired here. That's what I'm saying, is that what we're doing here is just bringing to you what's happening there. You're asking me, did the Giants reach out to me? Here's what I would say, Doug. It would be completely irresponsible for anybody to believe that this story ran without me doing reporting that included talking to the Giants, people with the Giants, people named in the story from the Giants. Like, what do people think I'm doing? you know? So that's what I view as an insult and as below the belt and inaccurate and really nasty, is like, for anybody to accuse me of selling one person's or side's version of a story. That's not what I do. That's not what I've ever done. And it's not what I'm going to continue to do, right? What I'm going to do is report on what's happening. And like I said, let's see. I was the one to break the news that Wink Martindale was resigning. And a lot came out in the 48 hours after that looked like it was pointing at Martindale and an ugly nature of his departure and an accusation of leaks coming from the assistants who were loyal to him, who Martindale was loyal to, the Wilkins brothers, right? That was an interesting spin on the situation, on personalities, on, I think it came from a place where it came from some publications that in November, when Jay Glazer was reporting that there was friction and there were things going on, these are publications that was telling the Giants fan base that there was nothing going on, there was nothing wrong, this was inaccurate, everything's fine. Meanwhile, I was sitting here with you guys telling you what? Telling you, here's what the team looks like. Here are the positive, here are the negatives. Here is a lot of change that's probably coming at the end of the year. There's stuff going wrong internally. It's not all what it seems to be. It's not going well. This was when the Giants even were winning a few games. They won that 3-game winning streak. So I know I'm talking in a lot of different places, but I guess, I'm really passionate about this, Doug, is that I don't understand why people think that these stories are agenda driven or involve one source or two sources or three sources or only four sources. Like, I don't understand it. I just think a lot of people don't fully understand what I do. And, all I ask for is respect. That's all. You don't have to agree with me or what I write, but just respect. That's all. Antonio says, who do you expect the Giants to re-sign, let go in terms of our own free agents? Antonio, let's go to the list. And I don't know these answers definitely one way or another, but I'll just go rapid fire, okay? Let's see. Saquon ends up somewhere else. Adoree Jackson, guess he could end up back on a cheaper deal, but don't know. Probably not here, but again, you need corners. But I'd say probably not here. Tyrod, probably not here. Isaiah Simmons, probably not here. Ashawn Robinson, probably here. Paris Campbell, not here. Xavier McKinney, not sure. Probably playing somewhere else. Jihad Ward, somewhere else. Justin Pugh, here. Matt Breida, I guess Matt Breida would be here again, especially special teams as well. Casey Kreider, probably here. Sterling Shepard, could see him ending up in a role with the team that's not a player role. I had reported that before, that John Mara would love to see him working, in the capacity for the team. Otherwise, Jared Davis, no idea. Probably not. Randy Bullock, the kicker, no. Graham Gano will be ready for next year. Matt Peart, probably not. Gunnar Olszewski, I think, will be on the team. Sean Harlow, probably not. J.C. Hassenauer, probably not. Tyree Phillips, I would think you'd want him back. Not sure what he would want, how long it's going to take him to rehab. Darnay Holmes, probably not. Ben Bredesen. Good question there on Ben Bredesen. I mean, I think he's the kind of person you want to reward and keep around on your team, even if he ends up as a depth player rather than a starter next year. So I could see him being back. But again, guards don't grow on trees either. So, let's see. Wyatt Davis, no. Lawrence Cager, no. Jacob Eason, I think, is going to be, they did sign him as an exclusive rights, I think, but he's back. He's going to be part of their spring program. Shane Lemieux probably gone. Nick McLeod will be back, restricted free agent. Cam Brown probably gone. Carter Coughlin gone. Isaiah Hodgins back, restricted free agent, probably. Actually, I don't know. Benton Whitley seemed like a guy they wanted to develop. Cade York gone. So hope that didn't distress you, but I think it's going to be a very different team next year. Let's see. Brett says LT liked Tamon Fox. He had some big hits in the little time he has played, and I'd like to see more of him. Yeah, I thought he should have been on the game day roster more. I thought he did well when he was brought up in that late season game against the Eagles. Especially even when they were short at edge, they were, kind of activating a lot of receivers and not a lot of edge rushers. It was interesting. Hunter says, I don't want Fields, but do you think Giants could reach out to try to get Justin Fields? I don't think that makes sense to me. That doesn't make sense to me. Molly Mall, if you draft a new quarterback, then that quarterback sitting for a year is BS. The problem is that quarterback will deal with the same problems. Why isn't Justin Herbert winning? Why is Patrick Mahomes having his worst statistical year? How did Tua go from can't throw 20 yards downfield to MVP conversations? Every quarterback needs help. Molly Mall, that's true too. That's true too. And that's part of the reason why they could end up using that high pick on a lineman or a receiver. You got Marvin Harrison, but he won't last to their pick. But you got Adunze? How do you say his name at Washington? That receiver, offensive line as well. So that your argument is a strong one there too. Brett says for their jobs, Daboll and Schoen stick with Jones this season and pay Tyrod. I don't know if Tyrod would be interested in coming back and getting benched for Tommy DeVito again, though. I'll say that. The line improves and we get a wide receiver 1. If it doesn't work out, Mara will blame himself and they don't get fired. I don't know. I could see them getting a veteran stopgap instead, but man, I really think with Daniel Jones's neck injury history, like if you're not getting a young quarterback in here now, it's scary to me. Yeah, Adam says Fields is similar to Jones. I don't see them doing that trade. Let's see. Newton says any young guy will be better than Jones and his inability to go beyond first read, staring down guys, afraid to make harder throws. Plus is 25 injury guarantees. They need to trade up. Doug says, do you expect the new defensive coordinator to have freedom to choose their own assistant coaches, or will the current coaches remain until the end of their contract? It looks like, who are the current guys on staff right now? You have Jerome Henderson, John Eguiguaru, Mike Trier. No indication that those guys would be out if they brought in a new defensive coordinator. Obviously, those are also guys I think who would be in the mix. Dre Patterson as well, the defensive line coach. So, I don't think – hold on, I've got to turn this flashing light off here. Give me a second. Sorry about that. So yeah, I don't think they would be wiping out the defensive staff if they bring in a new DC. No. Let's see. Molly Mall says smartest thing to do is to trade down and gain capital for this year and next year. Build the team, fill the holes. If Daniel Jones isn't the guy, get your quarterback with the extra capital. All depends on whether they love somebody or not. Matt Kelly says, what is Jones' contract if he gets hurt next year? I know it's locked in for next year for $40 million, but could they be committed beyond that with another injury? I believe so. I believe so. Let me call up that contract again here. See, so 23 million of his 2025 base salary is guaranteed for injury at signing. So, and 12 million of that is scheduled to vest at the start of the 25 year. So 23 million of the 2025 salary is guaranteed for injury, to answer your question there. So let's see. Newton says there aren't really any good QBs next draft, and it's rare to draft even at 6. You strike when you have the opportunity. Antonio says, have Dre Patterson and Leslie Frazier got any consideration for a DC interview with the Giants? Been pretty quiet. Wouldn't surprise me if they both interviewed, though. Hunter says no one ever gave the Colts coach enough credit for the job he did with the Eagles last year. Sirianni was nothing without Schoen and Jonathan Gannon. Yeah, Shane Steichen, a huge, huge, huge loss for the Eagles. No question about it. You talk to people around the league, and that comes up a lot. How much Steichen made things easier for Hurts and how that's obvious now with his absence. Phil says, Pat, from you being inside the building, what vibe do you get from the front office? Do you feel like they're going up for a quarterback or staying put for a wide receiver or hoping a guy falls to them at the quarterback position? Right now, I would say if they love a quarterback, that's the guy. After that, my guess, based on the high level of talent in the draft, it would be wide receiver and then offensive line third. But that's where I stand right now. Reserve the right to change my mind as I head to the Senior Bowl. I will be at the Senior Bowl, by the way. Good opportunities for Mike Kafka as a head coach at the East-West Shrine Bowl coming up. And Shea Tierney, the quarterback's coach. He is an offensive coordinator at the Senior Bowl, and Mike Adams, assistant special teams coach, coaching the special teams at the Senior Bowl as well. Those will be interesting to watch. Hunter says, do you think the Giants block him from leaving if he got a job offer elsewhere for another OC job with Kafka? If he wanted to leave and got another OC job, then I think he would be gone. But I'm not sure. That's a good question. Sometimes those things are kind of like, okay, we could block him, but then, yes, it wouldn't look good if we lose all 3 of our coordinators. But if we block him and people find out that we're blocking him from leaving and everybody knows how he's being treated here, how will that make us look, right? So I think if he ended up trying to leave for another OC job that was wanting to hire him, then that would probably happen. But not sure it's going to happen. I mean, it's, so far, I don't know if he's leaving. Molly Mall says, drafting a quarterback for me does the opposite of buying time. They had an opportunity to draft their guy. They chose to pay Daniel Jones. If you want your guy, you are incompetent. If you now want your guy, you are incompetent. Molly Mall, you know what? I think you bring up a great point there. That their chance to draft the guy this year and they end up paying Daniel Jones instead. So you don't necessarily, have the ability to do that now. I think that's fair. Joey B says, I got here late. Tell us what really happened with Wink and Daboll, and who are we thinking replaces Wink, and what's up with Kafka? Are we okay with him going, and who's his replacement? Also, another great live and a great job, Pat. Love these. Thanks, Joey. What really happened was, it really centers on the full picture and the game management element where the Giants were losing games as their head coach, who was not calling plays on either side of the ball regularly, was failing to manage those games properly in those moments. And then throughout the staff, Kafka, McGahee, Martindale, even down to lower level assistants going back to the previous year, was pointing fingers, playing the blame game, and the game day dynamic became one of walking on eggshells, unpredictability, chaotic, and it became something that people involved in the entire process, throughout the process, resented and didn't feel like it was contributing to positive results, but felt like it was helping cause negative results. And really, I think the game management element of it, you even watch the end of the Rams game, end of the Jets game, end of the Bills game, there was nothing happening from a solution standpoint in the head coach seat that was giving anybody any confidence that the operation was sound and that it was headed in the right direction and then it was building, right? And so I don't think there was a lot of confidence, throughout the operation in what it was looking like and what it's going to look like, right? And I think what ended up happening with Martindale and Daboll at the end was it was already trending towards Martindale leaving the Giants for something else. And then that last day resulted in him blowing up. When the Giants and Brian Daboll informs him he's firing the Wilkins brothers, that results in Martindale blowing up at Daboll, telling him go F yourself and storming out, telling him he's leaving the team, he's resigning, and then everything ends up getting worked out. So, but like I said in the story, like it all started back in the first training camp where the offense is struggling and people like me are criticizing and telling fans how bad the offense looks. And Daboll starts telling people he's, letting the perception grow that he's, the defense knows some of these calls, and that's why they're jumping some of these calls and, some of these routes and making these plays. I'm trying to, give Daniel Jones a challenge, right? That was the perception growing. But really the reality was the defense was just outperforming to the point where Daboll then puts a limit on the amount of blitzes the defense can run in the practice. And in training camp. And so it just created like that offense versus defense mentality. That was also something that just pervaded the way things went through the 2 years that they were together. Let's see. And Joey, and also Patrick says they were talking Super Bowl. Oh yeah. I know. Go back and look. Google Sterling Shepard, Brian Daboll, Super Bowl, Pat Leonard. You'll see the story. And Joey, yeah, again, like, when it gets overt, like it did in that Washington game on the headsets, where he's blaming the defensive staff and coaches for the loss against the Jets, which obviously we know is on everybody associated with the team. And that, a head coach in that situation, having lost that game based on his involvement in it, can't be putting the blame on one side of the ball and a handful of coaches like that. Like, you just can't do that. That's not how it works. That's not how leadership works. Molly Mall says, you don't tell everyone you think we're a Super Bowl team and don't believe in your quarterback. So the trash O-line and injuries, they all of a sudden don't believe in the quarterback. Molly Mall, I mean, it's all about performance, right? And I think Brian Daboll was pretty clear that he didn't think Jones was playing well enough this year, even before the injury and even with the offensive line, its injuries. And Daniel Jones actually came out and just said flat out that he wasn't going to make those excuses. He wasn't playing well enough. But Molly Mall, I think you're right on it, man. I like your impatience with the operation. I think that's where it deserves to be. Mike says, Pat, do you really believe Daboll blames his assistants and doesn't take any accountability? I get the lack of composure being a horrible leadership quality, but a raging incompetent narcissist? I don't know, man. I didn't call him a narcissist. But I do think what I tried to do was lay out that picture of what what actually happened in these different instances and what has been happening with the Giants. You can draw your own conclusions. But that's what happened. And I definitely, I think if you tell people you're going to lose this game for us, like you lost us the Jets game, I don't think there's any other way to interpret that. Your report of assistants advising people not to come here, they should and will be fired. You agree with that, right? So James is asking if someone in the Giants is telling other people not to come here, that person should be fired. Well, James, it sounds like you are reacting. Your first reaction is to go find the leak rather than stop and think, wow, what does our organization do so badly that has people who still work for us advising people not to come here, right? Like, that's the problem. The problem is not that somebody is telling someone else that. The problem is that they are in there and they can say it. So that means that something you're doing is very wrong, right? And broken. So that's what I would say. Hunter says he definitely is not hearing something and instantly spitting it out to the public unless it's credible. People act like what Pat does is easy, probably takes a long time to materialize. People would never believe how much work and capital and time gets put into a story like this and reporting like this. All right, let's get through some of these last questions and we'll get out of here. Thanks so much for participating, guys. Please hit the like buttons if you haven't already. That helps us drive engagement here on the page as well. Molly Mall says Big Blue kickoffs telling people not to listen to the reports and that Daboll is the opposite of what was reported. My story is accurate, Molly Mall. I don't, whatever anybody else wants to say. My story was accurate. Everything in my story was accurate. I would bet anything on that, and I wouldn't even bet on it. I don't have to bet on it. It is. My story is accurate. No need to defend it. Ramon says, hi, Pat. I'm following you from Dominican Republic. Thanks, Ramon. Giants fan since 1983. Do you think the Giants are going for a quarterback in this draft on their first pick? As of this moment, I do. If not a quarterback, receiver. But I do think quarterback, but we will see. Vincent says, is this the most turnover of a roster for the Giants you've ever seen? It might end up being, Vincent. It might end up being, including the coaching staff, while retaining the head coach and GM, including the players who will be leaving and turning over and the coaching staff. Since I've been here in 2016, it could end up being, yeah. Doug says, could you elaborate on broken process of game management analytics? Do you place most of the blame on Daboll's impulsiveness for not listening to what they talk about during the week? It's everything. It's the meetings they have don't cover enough ground to prepare for every situation. It's on game day. Maybe Daboll isn't necessarily taking the advice, but also the game management people who are in Daboll's ear, you need people there who are going to stand up to the head coach because game day is not easy, right? So if Daboll feels like he needs to do something else and he's thinking about kind of going in another direction that you've planned on, you also need people to stand up to him in a constructive way. That doesn't, stand up to him doesn't mean it's negative. But that's not all on Daboll. But it is his purview to make sure that process functions properly, right? And also just stick to your guns, whether it's Daboll or the game management team. It's about having a defined process and the analytics like that are advanced enough that you've studied enough game situations and gone over enough of them and prepared ahead for a lot of times you're preparing for things that aren't going to happen, right? But it's that whole comprehensive process. Mike says, I'll put it to you like this, Pat. If Daboll is an offensive coach whose offense scores 10 points and then blames the defense for the loss, I would be stunned beyond comprehension. Mike, that's why you should be stunned, because that's what happened. Canadians P says this team's wide receivers always stink. I think Darius Slayton's been consistent. I do think they need a number one. And Hyatt flashed some big play potential, but you need to see more. Brett says, I think the offensive coordinator should be on the field calling plays to get a better feel from the players. If Daboll ends up calling the plays, that certainly is what's going to be the case. Also, that was the case in the Cowboys game in Dallas when Shea Tierney was calling the plays in the second half. But interesting perspective there, Brett. Hunter says, watch for Dylan Laub at the Senior Bowl, the UNH running back. Thank you. Adam F says, how about Nix, Manningham, Cruz, or Plaxico Toomer? About wide receivers. Yeah, no, they've had good wide receivers. I think he's talking about recently, since Odell, they haven't had the stud number one. Charlie says, man, how much longer do we need to listen to the excuse making for Martindale? I don't know what you're talking about, Charlie. We're talking about positives on the team. We're talking about the draft. We're talking about negatives with the team. We're talking about Martindale. We're talking about Kafka. We're talking about McGahee. I don't know what you are referring to. A2Z Me says, what's up, A2? Says, from training camp forward, you could tell this team was going nowhere. Thanks for keeping us updated, Pat. You got it, A2. You can tell the other fans here, people like Charlie, we were steering you in the right direction, and we will not steer you wrong. Brett says, worst scenario, does Barkley go to the Eagles or Cowboys? And how much is spite worth? Does Jones go with him after this season? How many Super Bowls do they win? I definitely think there's a good chance Saquon ends up going somewhere. I think it would be with an eye on, yes, getting paid and valued, but also winning. And so I wouldn't say it would be based out of spite. I think it would be based out of capitalizing on his value, but winning and playing well in big moments. Charlie, if you want to keep doubting everything and just trying to dump on our kind of truthful conversation here, I would ask you to go back and just look at, it's a little tiresome by now, but I told the fan base that the Giants were looking to trade Odell Beckham Jr. Everybody said I was a moron, and I made it up. Then they traded him. I said that they were trying to trade Kadarius Toney. Everybody said I was a moron, and I made it up, and I hated the Giants, and then they traded him. I told everybody that something was coming here, that there was a lot of friction internally, that it was not just isolated to one area. And then when Jay Glazer reports the thing about Martindale and Daboll, and, there's a lot of people coming out saying there's no truth to it. I'm telling people here in our community and in the daily news that, watch for the end of the season. There's going to be change. It's going to be a lot more change than you think. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be painful. And then it happens. So, Charlie, if you're going to bring, critical comments about reporting or take shots at, my information or me as a reporter, just back it up with facts, right? Just back it up with facts. That's what I would ask you. All right, let's see. Yes, A2, you're right, too. Early on, you could see it was going nowhere. A soft training camp, a light training camp that didn't have the team ready to play health-wise, mentally, physically, etc. Matthew says, since the Giants built a town around Wink's 3-4 defense, do they need to select another DC with a 3-4 philosophy? In my opinion, Daboll's clock is ticking and can't afford a defensive rebuild. Matthew, I agree. And that's why I think they're casting a wide net. I think they have to maintain some consistency because that's the talent of acquisition part of this as well. The personnel they've been adding has been for that kind of scheme as well in these 2 years. James says Giants aren't taking a quarterback at 6. Jones will be the quarterback. Oh, boy, that'll be something. Molly Mall says, I trust you for sure. Thank you, Molly Mall. And Molly Mall, by the way, you're the MVP of this chat. You've been bringing it. I love it. I'm going to go back after this chat and review some of the things that you said. I think you made a lot of strong points today. Hunter says, what's your prediction for this weekend's games? I'm going to go with the Ravens, the Niners, who am I forgetting? Ravens, Niners. Let's see. Ravens, Niners, Lions, and Chiefs. I know picking the Chiefs right now unpopular, but I have a hard time picking against them even on the road, and they're not. This isn't even the best version of the Chiefs, but somehow I think they're going to keep winning. Doug says we need a behind-the-scenes sights and sounds for all the work of the reporters. That would be fun. I would enjoy that. Robert says, Pat, where do you think Big Blue goes for defensive coordinator? See, my answer to Matthew above, I do think maintaining some consistency in scheme and personnel acquisition makes sense. Part of the reason they're casting a wide net. Molly Mall says, you are the only Giants reporter as far as I'm concerned. Molly Mall, I really appreciate you, man. Do you think Saquon is on the team following this year? Braden says. Braden, I don't think he's going to be on the team this year, but hopefully we'll get an answer on that soon. Saquon even pleaded with the Giants to get it done and make the decision early. Hunter says, I trusted you 100% after the Toney stuff you called out last season. Thank you, Hunter. You are loyal. Brett says, right on, Pat. Keep doing what you're doing. Sunlight is the best medicine. Yeah, and that's my job, is to bring the truth to people and bring my informed opinion and analysis as well on that truth. That's the job. That's it. Enough of this taking shots at people and the media and all this, making it personal. It has nothing to do with that. Hunter says, I don't trust the Bills till they actually beat a big dog in the playoffs for once. I agree. Mike says, Pat, I believe you are good at what you do and appreciate your work. I just can't believe it. Daboll seemed like he was competent based on what your article. He needs to be fired immediately. Yeah, Mike, I think both things can be true, that he has made some positive impacts on some things, but that the overall picture is a negative one. Does that make sense? Right? So yes, he won the Coach of the Year award. Yes, he helped get them to the playoffs. Yes, they won a playoff game. Those things happened, and he deserves and gets credit for that. But he also gets blamed for the negatives. And because it got so bad after that early success, and really to me, it looks like that 6-1 start to the first season was the anomaly. That's what it looks like to me right now. But that's what the beginning of year 3 is going to be. I agree with you. I think it's astounding. I think we have to say this. It's astounding that the Giants wouldn't pick up the phone and call a Bill Belichick or a or Jim Harbaugh or whatever at this moment just to gauge interest, even if they're working the back channels, because these guys are on the market. The way that your operation's running right now, like, you have to pursue all possibilities. Obviously, we haven't seen that happen. But I do think, given what we know about what's happened, I think it's crazy that would not happen. Like, if you're running a full operation, you don't want to be the Dave Gettleman, don't pick up the phones and entertain trade requests because I know I want Saquon and I'm taking him at 2. You don't want to be that when it comes to the coaching carousel, right? Shane says the new DC has to be based in 3-4, but with how the league is these days, you're almost always in sub package. Have to keep Dex at nose. Banks is a man corner, etc. Roster is built for it. Yep. Simeon says, which of these teams would be the best fit for Saquon? Dallas, Baltimore, or Buffalo? Ooh, probably Baltimore. Baltimore, I would say. Ooh, the Odell Saquon reunion too. Hey now. Hunter says, do you think the Packers could be the wild card team that shocks the world, win the Super Bowl, or not realistic at all? No, I think the Niners will be healthy and ready for that game. Hunter says, I would like to think Saquon wouldn't go in division. I don't think that would stop him, but I also don't, like I said, I don't think it'll be based out of spite as well. All right, guys, we're going to wrap that up here. That's been about 75 minutes, and you guys have been awesome as always. Like I said, I will get a full schedule to you. I get a defined schedule of when we're going to do these. Thank you so much for your participation today. Remember, super chats and super stickers to support the channel as always. Doug, thank you for your insight and questions as well. I will try to continue breaking that news for you. Remember, follow me, PL on NFL at TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. And then we have P. Leonard NYDN on X and the New York Daily News website, nydailynews.com, and the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard podcast on the Believe Network, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get them. You guys enjoy the games. Hunter, going on that. See you later next time. And maybe next time we talk, we'll have some more hirings and more direction to discuss when it comes to the Giants, the 2024 offseason, and the regular season coming up, a pivotal one for Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, no question about it.